Welcome. My name is Danute Debney. I'm with CelaPhontus, a decision strategy innovation company. I'm also the author of How the Tin Man Found His Brain. I'm here with you today to discuss 5 elements which are very, very helpful in approaching an expansion of emotional intelligence. And what I'm going to do is summarize all of them first, and then we'll go into them one by one. Emotional intelligence is a little bit of an elusive term. In many respects, it includes not only our emotional awareness of our lives and ourselves, but also how to be able to interact with others and be able to manage situations on that basis. But an actual definitive definition seems to be elusive. So I'm going to speak in general terms about subjective awareness and emotional intelligence here, and let me begin by giving you the list. So number 1, self-awareness. This may seem like an obvious one, but very often we overlook our own sense of our self-awareness. Number 2, conscious behavior. Number 3, pausing to breathe before acting. Number 4, responding rather than reacting. And number 5, being willing to understand someone else's position. Now let me go through these in just a little bit more detail. So self-awareness. Everything begins with the awareness each and every one of us has of ourselves and the world around us. It's part of the balance and the constructive tools that we bring to the party so that we can play well with one another. As a light day-to-day example, let me tell you a story of a friend of mine who does not always have that self-awareness going on for her. She seems to expect things of others that she would consider a terrible inconvenience if those people then expected it of her. She wants to be able to chat with you, and she wants to be able to chat with you. And if she would like to visit, she wants to be able to visit, essentially on her own terms. Now, she's not an entirely selfish person. In fact, she's actually very generous and very thoughtful many a times. But she's just not always aware in the present moment. And her friends occasionally have to remind her of this. Fortunately, her generosity and general empathy keep her from losing her friends. It's more a bit of a humor amongst all of us rather than something we hold against her. But it's an example of someone who's just not aware of herself and her position in relation to other people around her. So staying present, practicing being willing to be aware and emotionally present in the moment, is in your activities and when engaging people and the world around us, life in general. This is not just about an emotional position, but about accessibility and being able to be accessible to yourself and accessible to the world around you. Number 2, conscious behavior. Emotionally understanding who we are and what may be going on around us, then responding to those encounters, both personal and professional, is highly useful and even sometimes quite critical. I'm going to refer back to some people who have taught me a great deal about conscious awareness, about subjective awareness, and really about engaging life in general. And that's my mother and grandmother. When they were arrested in the dead of night by the Russians and sent to Siberia because of my grandfather's underground rescue activities during World War II, they were allowed to bring with them as much as they could carry. And my grandmother, being very pragmatic and present and conscious in the moment, decided to bring all of her jewelry and valuables. Now, one might think, oh, yes, for sentimental reasons or because of fear of losing the value of these items. But that wasn't the case at all. She really took them because she knew that down the road there would be situations where it would be advantageous for her to be able to barter. And something like pretty jewelry and other belongings that might be of some kind of wealth would be good resources for bartering. And she always did say to me, if you buy jewelry, always buy good jewelry. You never know when you may want to or need to give a wonderful ruby ring away in exchange for a loaf of bread. So my grandmother was ultimately very, very pragmatic and very conscious, present, and this is what we all need to be. It's a very dramatic example, but in our less dramatic day-to-day lives, we also need to be conscious and aware, present with our behavior and our emotional balance. And this helps us to not only manage a situation, but also to anticipate future challenges. And that can be extremely beneficial. The third point is pausing to breathe before acting. This seems like a light one, but I used to take this kind of subjectivity very, very, very to heart when I was involved in doing negotiations work for an airline. It can be critical sometimes. I was always mindful to pause and breathe before taking any significant step in the proceedings. It helped me to stay present. It helped me to be aware both emotionally and intellectually. And this does not mean taking an audible gulp of air. We're talking more about skipping a beat, of giving yourself that moment, and then moving forward. You gently oxygenate the brain, and it can be particularly helpful if you're involved in anything that's a controversy or anything that's confrontational. Point number 4, responding rather than reacting. Well, unless the situation calls for immediate action and does not allow for a moment of greater consideration, it's generally best not to react. Whenever we hear companies or countries having reacted to the situation, we hear this a lot. The country reacted. The company reacted to the situation. Virtually always there is a course correction down the line that is necessary. And sometimes, in truth, we cannot, all we can do is react, mainly because we don't have all the factors or there is fear of consequences. We may need to react and fix things later on. But a response doesn't have to take a great deal of consideration, depending on how complex or important the proposed action may be. Our minds can sometimes run down a list of points to consider very quickly. An example would be the story that others have heard me mention of the man who saved someone who fell on a train track. I always used to call him the hero, and he rescued a gentleman who fell on a train track at a subway station. And at first it appeared that maybe he was just reacting to this situation. But in reality, we learned through an interview in the media that allowed him to explain what was going through his mind. He mentioned that he actually went through a list of considerations and was therefore actually able to strategically respond in this way before he acted. So he stayed emotionally present, he stayed grounded and centered, and he used all of his faculties of the subjective awareness and his rational considerations and created a creative outcome that solved the situation. The last point I'd like to mention is being willing to understand someone else's position. Generally, we think we are willing to understand, but very often we are very, very invested in where we are coming from rather than trying to understand where others are coming from. We cannot arrive at empathy, which is a great part of emotional intelligence, if we don't endeavor to understand the position and the concerns of others. And this can be tough, admittedly, because sometimes we have no frame of reference for the concerns and the situation involved. We have no way to really wrap ourselves around that context. But here's something to keep in mind. We do have an imagination. And not only do we have an imagination, but there are many stories that are found in the media, found in movies, found in books, found in the news, which illustrate a lot of different variations of situations. And if we are mindful, if we pay attention, if we are there in the present, we can actually learn and benefit from many of these various resources. Let us practice being willing to learn something we may not already know or understand. It's very helpful if we can put ourselves in that position to begin with, because it's amazing what kind of insight and perspective can emerge on that basis. And this exercise can only broaden our perspective and understanding, and even our abilities at times, because we learn things through these kinds of exercises of expanding ourselves, of extending ourselves, and learning more. And hopefully our emotional intelligence gets to benefit as well. Thank you so much for joining me.